My name is Don Dickson, and I want to welcome you and thank you for joining me today for another edition of our structure fishing workshop. Now, over the last few sessions, we've been talking about brakes and brake lines. We sort of zeroed in for most of that discussion on brake lines. And today I'm going to flip the switch a little bit and talk more about brakes. But I want to begin by having you understand this. Brake lines by themselves cannot entirely control and dictate the movements of the fish. We can't just rely on the brake lines. Many times you may have a good looking area in your lake. Let's just say for a minute, let's go to your lake. Let's say in the lake that you fish on a regular basis, you have discovered a nice looking bar, and it leads from the shallows all the way to the deepest hole in your natural lake or to the channel of the reservoir. So you're thinking, now there's a spot I ought to catch fish. And you go and you work that thing today, tomorrow, next week, next month. You continually fish this area, but you never catch any fish. None. Now, many times fish will hit and make contact with a structure. Now, when the fish first make contact with that deep brake line, they may not ever become aware that there is, in fact, a shallower brake line further on up that structure. They may not be able to see it. Therefore, they don't know that it exists. Now, there's only two ways that a fish can know that the spot where you're fishing, there's only two ways he can know that that spot exists. He's got to first be able to see it when he makes contact with the structure, or he has to follow other spots that lead him to that spot where you're fishing. He either has to see it initially, or he has to have some other ones to follow to lead him to get to that spot. I hope you're following along with that. So here's what happens quite often. I'm going to show you a side view picture here of this bar. Side view, brake line at 12 feet, brake line at 20 feet. And you're looking at that and say, well, it leads from the shoreline all the way to the channel. But you see, those two brake lines could be so far apart that the fish can't see the second one. And if he can't see it, he doesn't know it exists, he will not go. And over a course of time, as the reservoir is first flooded and the fish become aware of this area or any lake or reservoir, once it's established that the fish cannot see shallower, that's another way of saying to you that old great statement by Buck, the first thing we got to know is, does that structure lead all the way? He's talking about, does it lead the fish all the way? Not does it end up going all the way, but does it lead the fish? Now remember, we've been talking about brakes and brake lines. Fish can see well, but they can't see very far. So in order for this structure that I'm showing you here to be successful, we'd have to make a few changes. Now people ask me all the time, well, in that situation, how far is too far for the fish? I can't say because I'm not a fish. But we know that he can't see really far. So if we're fishing a spot like this with no additional help, and we never catch a fish, they've eliminated it. They've eliminated that spot because it doesn't lead all the way. It goes all the way, but it doesn't lead all the way. I hope you're getting that difference. Fish have to be able to see it in order to go. And more importantly, they need to have that road back. They can't get someplace and then be lost. Even though it's an instinctive thing, they can't be lost. They need that security of their deep water sanctuary zone. So in order for a structure to be good, it must lead all the way. from the deep to the shallows, and from the shallows back to the deep. And in many cases, you'll find structures where the only features are so far removed from each other, even though at first glance it looks like it should produce, it doesn't, because the fish cannot see that shallower feature. It's too far away, too much distance involved. In that case, the fish will eliminate that structure and they will find one that does lead all the way over time. Just so you can see that more clearly, I'm going to take that same structure and I'm going to add a couple things. We're going to put some things in there. We're going to add a weed line first. Then we're going to add a rock pile. And then we're going to throw in a stump in there, as well as the 2 break lines that existed. And now here's the side view of that structure. Now we've got a productive structure. To drive that point home even further, I'm going to show you another side view here. Then I just want you to get it in your mind. If this is the side view of a structure in my lake or in my reservoir, I look at that and instantly you have to say to yourself, there's 5 spots I need to fish. I need to fish the weed line. I need to fish the stump, the rock pile. I need to fish the 12-foot break line. I need to fish the drop off 28 feet. As you recall, when we began this study, I said, you got to understand, when fish move on structure, they're going to pause and eventually stop at a break or a break line that's on or connected to that structure. Now, before we leave this subject, or this sort of area of our subject, I want you to have this one last picture here of a side view of a productive structure in your lake, but I want you to look at it from a fish eye view. How do the fish actually use it? Well, if the weather and water conditions allow, and we're going to consider this to be a full migration of the fish, the weather is perfect. Warm front, nice and dark, cloudy, it's beautiful, weather-wise. We're going to talk about weather in our next study. At any rate, it's a beautiful condition. The fish are allowed to move, and the first thing they do, come up and they hit that contact point, which is that deep break line, the drop-off break line, the one that I talked about being the most important break line we have in fishing. The one final drop-off into deep water, the one final drop-off break line into the channel. That is the most important break line in fishing, and that's the first spot they hit. Now, once they hit that, they just sit there and relax for a couple of minutes, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and they're pausing. But they're stopped right there. They're not stopped somewhere in between. They're stopped right at that first drop-off. Now, as I stated, the weather and water is good. So now they're allowed to move beyond that. And the next thing they see is that second break line. They move right to it. They don't stop now in between. They move right to it, and then they pause. And again, it could be 2 minutes, it could be 3 minutes, it could be 7 minutes. They're all paused right there at that break line. So they pause at that break line. Let's say it's 5 minutes. But the weather's really good, as we just already previously discussed. So the fish are going to move shallower. So the next thing they see is the stump. I want to reinforce. We, the fish, you and me, we're the fish. We're not going to stop in between these two things because we're relating to the one we just left. We're relating to the one we see. We move right to it. In this case, a stump. And then we pause. And the weather allows. So then we see the next feature, which is a rock pile. We move right to the rock pile. And again, we're pausing. And the weather's really, really, really good today. So now we go and we hit the base of that weed line. Now, when they hit the base of the weed line, there could be some fish move up the weed line, some penetrate back in, maybe some move along the weed line. And that's how the fish move. Now, let me make this point right here. Instinctively, fish we know they don't have a brain and they sit around thinking this like we would, like human beings. But instinctively, the fish on this movement and migration, at all times, they knew where they were. And that's significant because they must have immediate access to the security of their deep water sanctuary. They have to know how to get back. As important it is for the fish to have a route to move shallower, it's even more important that they have that immediate access to the security of their deep water sanctuary zone. They always know where they are. Now, this is how they do it, guys. And I was thinking about this the other day, and somebody was talking to me about the Pittsburgh Pirates. And as many of you know, I'm a Pittsburgher. But the iconic Mr. Bob Prince, who was an announcer for the Pirates for, I don't know, 100 years or something like that. He had a saying, he said, how sweet it is. And when I think about how fish move on structure and how they pause at these spots, how they do it, exactly how they do it, how sweet that is. Because the only two ways for a fish to get to that spot, any one of those spots, is that he either could see it from the beginning of his migration, or there were some things that he could follow that actually led him to that spot. Think about it now. That's how they do it. That's how they have to do it. They have no choice. How they have to do it. And it gives a whole new connotation to what Buck says for a structure to produce. It must lead all the way from the shallows to the deepest water in the area. And he means lead all the way. Just like we led those fish on their migration, and so they can lead themselves back to the security of their deep water home. It's the way they do it. And because that's the way they do it, this is my comment about how sweet that is. Because every one of those spots they can see, we can see too. And those are the spots where you and I are going to meet up with the fish. Breaks, break lines, on or connected to structure. Okay. All that being said, I hope you have that firmly entrenched in your mind, because the breaks on the break lines, the breaks and the break lines on structure, these are the spots where you and I are going to meet up with those fish. This is where we're going to be pinpointing our fishing. These are the spots. And not only can the fish see them, but we can see them too. Okay. All that being said, we're going to get out of here, and we're going to have one more session on contact points before we totally leave the subject. And we're going to be doing that the next time we get together. So thanks for being with me today. I appreciate each and every one of you. And I want to encourage you to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram, and be sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done it. We're really developing a great crowd of structure fishermen, and I'm enthused about it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you the next time.